In lesson 313B, this is one of those Minnesota Essential lessons that's been added. We're going to continue rounding, but this time we're going to be able to round to the thousands. You will need your white Unit 3 packet for this, along with your whiteboard marker, and maybe your multiplication chart if you do not have those mastered yet. Let's go ahead and take our whiteboard, and at the top, would you write 20, 17, and 30. What I would like for you to do is to write all the factor pairs for each number. I've given you a clue with the number of blanks needed. And then I want you to tell me if that number is prime, which means it has exactly 2 factors, which would be 1 times itself, and which ones are composite, which means that they have more than 2 factors. So be able to identify those as well. So go ahead, pause your video. Remember, you should start with 1 times itself always. And when you go in order, 1, 2, anything times 3, anything times 4, anything times 5, and you get to the turnaround fact, you know you have found all of the factors. So go ahead and pause the video right now and find all the factors for 20, 17, and 30. Then put either a P for prime next to it or a C for composite. All right, at this point in time, if your video is still on, you should have all of the factors written. So if we start with 20, I would always say 1 times itself. Anything times 2? Absolutely. Anything that ends in an even number, 2 will be a factor. And then my next one would have been 5 times 4. And there's my turnaround fact. So I know I don't want to include that one, but now I have them all. Next, 1 times 17. By the way, this is called composite because there are more than 2 factors. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factors for the number 20. 17 is called prime. It has exactly 2 factors, 1 and itself. 30, I have 1 times 30. It's even number, so 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6, and then my next one would have been 6 times 5, and there I have my turnaround fact. All right, go ahead and erase your whiteboard. We're going to work inside of our white Unit 3 packet, and you're going to go to the very back. Some of them have page numbers on them, and some of them do not. So you're going to go all the way back until you get to lesson 313B. 313B, and at the top it will say rounding. All right, so it is like the second to last page. The math message says to shade the grid at the right to show 57 hundredths. Remember, that means 57 little cubes. Well, I know I can count by tens and do longs. So this would be 10, 20, 30. Do this with me in your packet. 40, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, and 57. Number 2 says, is 57 hundredths closer to 5 tenths or 6 tenths? So if you think of a number line, where would that be on the number line? And we'll be doing that in just a minute. Now, here would be 5 tenths, and adding that plus this one would be 6 tenths. So it is closer to 6/10 than it is 5/10. Number 3 says, label the number line below to show whether 57/100 is closer to 5/10 or 6/10. Well, halfway, go ahead in your packet. Let's go ahead and put halfway. Think of this as 50 cents. Think of this as 60 cents. What would halfway between 50 cents and 60 cents be? It would be 55 cents. So if we look at 57/100, it's going to probably come somewhere right about there. So is that closer to 5/10 or 6/10? It's closer to 6/10. Moving down our page, number 4 says, to shade the grid at the right to show 728 thousandths. If you remember from the other day, each one of these equal 10, and a whole row is 100. So let's go ahead and shade in 128 thousandths. So that would be 100, 200, 300, shade it with me, 400, 500, 600, 700. Now here would be 710, 720, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Now it's asking us between which 2/10 is 4 and 728 thousandths. I'm going to look at the number in the tenths place, which is 7. So the lower number would be 4 and 7/10. If we were to be 4 or less, we let it rest. If it was 5 or more, we would raise the score. So 1 more than 7 would be 8. So this number falls between 4 and 7/10 and 4 and 8/10. What number is exactly halfway between the numbers you wrote in 5A? Well, 5/8, imagine it as money. Think of it as $4.70 and $4.80. What would be halfway between $4.70 and $4.80? Halfway between 70 and 80 cents would be, I won't put the dollar sign there, but sometimes it does help if we think of it in terms of money, would be 4 and 75/100. Round 4 and 728 thousandths to the nearest tenth. Use your answers from problems 4 and 5 and the number line below to help you. Well, let's go ahead and put down our lower number, which is 4 and 7/10, and our higher number, which is 4 and 8/10. Halfway we said would be 4 and 75/100. And what we're doing is placing 4 and 728. Well, 728 would be less than 75. So maybe right about here. So which one is it closer to? It is closer to 4 and 7/10. We're going to go ahead to our next page. We're going to do just a couple on this page, not the entire page. I'm going to show you a longer way to do it to kind of think about where it would be on a number line. And then I'm going to go ahead and teach you a little shortcut like we've done with whole numbers. It says in number 7 to complete the number lines and plot the numbers on the number lines and then use them to help you round the numbers. So if we're going to round 6 and 43/100 to the nearest tenth, the lower number, well, let's look at the tenths is 4, so the lower number would be 6 and 4/10, and one higher would be 6 and 5/10. And now what we are going to do is plot halfway. Halfway between 4/10 and 5/10 would be 4, 45 hundredths. We can put a 0 behind here and it doesn't change it. 40 cubes would be the same as 4 longs, and 50 cubes would be the same as 5 longs. So halfway between 40 and 50 would be 45. And 6 and 43 hundredths would be right about here. So it is closer to 6 and 4 tenths. Let's do one more like that. We have 182 thousandths. We're going to round it to the nearest tenth. The 1 is in the tenths place. So the lower number would be 1/10. The higher number would be 1 more, which would be 2/10. Now we can put a 0 behind here because 2 longs is the same as 20 cubes and 1 long is the same as 10 cubes. So halfway would be 15 hundredths. If we were going to plot that on the number line, we would say 182 thousandths would be probably somewhere right about here. So it is closer to 2/10 than it is 1/10. Let's skip down to the bottom of this page. Sorry, there we go. That's the right one. I'm going to teach you a little bit of a shortcut because you know how to do this already. Now we're just applying it to decimals. So we're going to round all these numbers to the nearest tenth. What you're going to do is circle the number in the tenths place and draw an arrow to the right. We're going to say, to the neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So we're going to keep everything before the circled number, the tenths place, the same. The 6, we look to the neighbor, it's 4 or less, so we're going to let the 6 rest. And everything after it turns to a 0. Let's try another one. 238 thousandths. We're rounding it to the nearest tenth, so circle the number in the tenths place, which is the first number after the decimal. Then we draw an arrow to the neighbor and we say 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. It's 4 or less, so we let it rest. We keep the 0 the same, we let the 2 rest, and everything after it turns to a 0. Let's go ahead and try C. This would be read 9 and 65 hundredths. Circle the number in the tenths place. Draw an arrow to the neighbor. Just like we did with whole numbers, we say 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So keep the 9 the same. We are not changing that. We're just changing the tenths and everything after it. So it's 5 or more, so we're going to raise the score. The 6 becomes a 7, and everything after it turns to a 0. So rounded to the nearest tenth is 9 and 7/10. Now let's try D. We would read this number as 106 hundredths. We circle the number in the tenths place, which is a 0. Draw an arrow to the neighbor. We say to the neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. And it's 5 or more, so we're going to raise the score. Keep the 100 the same. Everything from the tenths place and after changes. 5 or more, we raise the score from a 0 to a 1, and everything after it turns to a 0. Let's try 2 more, and then you do not have to worry about the rest. The next one says round to the nearest whole number. The whole number would be the ones place. So we're going to circle the number in the ones place and still look 1 to the right. 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. Well, the number is 5 or more, so we're going to change the score, raise the score from a 0 to a 1, and everything after it turns to a 0. In other words, 10 and 6/10 is closer to 11 than it is 10. Circle the number in the ones place, draw an arrow to the neighbor, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. And it's 5 or more, so we raise the 0 to a 1, and everything after it turns to a 0. So we'll continue rounding with decimals, but just remember, it's just like whole numbers.